Hi everyone. So in today's video, I'm going to go over the two-column analysis. I use this document quite often, and this document, what it'll do is there's two columns, and the first one is for the current as is today's cash flow of the property, and the second one is going to be the stabilized cash flow of the property. And these are very quick and dirty, back of the napkin analysis is that you can plug in the numbers and it will give you the surface level information that you need to decide if you want to dig in deeper or not. When I say dig in deeper, that just means someone who might want to do a 5-year cash flow projection with an internal rate of return, or maybe a 10-year with an internal rate of return. I've used this sheet before to help me decide if the property was going to make sense if I purchased it or not. So this document, it doesn't have to be, but it can be the end all be all. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the document now. And when you look at it, it may look a little crazy at first because there's a lot of different fields, a bunch of little, green and red tabs and whatnot, but it's more simple than you think. I want you to really just understand that the yellow cells are what we're going to fill out and everything else is pre-populated. So each cell that I felt like it was necessary, I added little notes here so that as I go down the sheet, it'll go ahead and remind you what goes into the yellow box. Now, although the yellow boxes are all you need to change and everything else is formulated already, it doesn't mean you can't change it. I don't recommend it unless you know what you're doing, but you can change, there's no password protection on any of this. So if you want to change it, feel free. Just know that if you change it, you don't want to override the original document because it's something that you're going to want to go back to and use over and over again. So as I go ahead and explain this, I'll fill this out so that we have talking points at every cell. And at the end of this, we can decide together, hey, is this something that we'd buy or not? And how come? So right away, the building size, the square footage, I'm going to go ahead and use 25,000 square feet. Okay. So 25,000 square feet is going to be the rentable size of the building. Make sure you use the rentable size, meaning that what you're actually charging on rent and not the gross size. When it's a single tenant building, you can use the gross size because the one tenant is renting the entire building. But if it's two or more, there are many times where, let's say it's two tenants, the building might be 5,000 square feet. The gross size might be 5,000 square feet, but the rentable square footage might only be about 4,500 square feet. And the reason why is that difference there, that 500 square feet difference, that's just going to be like the awning and like the sidewalk space that the roof kind of overhangs so that customers can walk into the businesses. You don't get rent on that. So you want to make sure when you're dealing with multi-tenant retail, you're using the square footage that is rentable, aka heated. The stabilized market triple net rate, that's going to be the rate where, let's just say you've got an average building. Average meaning average. If that area's got buildings all built in the 1990s, then the building that you're working with should also be a 1990s building when you're looking at the average stabilized market triple net rate. If all the buildings are 1990 and you plan on putting up a brand new building that's built in 2024, 2025, your rate is going to be different than those buildings in 1990. So just understand what you're working with here. But to move on with this sheet, this here is just asking you what is the triple net rate once rent is fully stabilized. And let's go ahead and use $30. Okay. Estimated expenses per square foot. Let's go ahead and use an average number of $10 a foot. Sometimes you'll find buildings at $5 a foot, sometimes at 15. We'll use 10 for the average. Price, let's just say this building is going to be on the somewhat lower demographic side of town. So we're going to say that this building is probably about $100 a foot, maybe a little more. Let's call it $3 million, okay? $3 million is going to be the price of the building. Down payment, we hope we can get away with 30%. That's the down payment for your loan. Amortization years, let's use 25 years. Depending on the lender, sometimes they ask for, it could be 20 years, 15 years. Sometimes the buyer asks for that. I put 25 because that's a natural default that spreads out the payments more, gives you a lower overhead per month. But there's some buyers who are like, hey, give me the 15, give me the 20. I want to pay more principal up front and pay it off ASAP. And, everyone's different. But by default, I normally use 25. Interest rate, Very important that you know what the market interest rates are. Right now, it's currently 7.5%. The note I put in here is that make sure you check your current market interest rates to ensure proper underwriting. You want to make sure that you know what the interest rates are. Talk to your lenders, talk to your mortgage brokers, know what the rates are before you fill this in, because the interest rate here is really going to drive the deal. Even by a quarter point, half a point, everything matters when it comes to the interest rate. So make sure you've got the best gauge possible. You don't want to put the lowest interest rate. Like, for example, I put 7.5 here, but just this morning I got quotes at 7.10, 7.25, but I'm going to bump it up a little bit to give myself a little bit of cushion, because things happen. Rates change, and lenders, let's say the lender this morning, oh yeah, we'll lend it at 7.10%, but what if they bail out and then you got to go find a new lender? The new lender might be at 7.5. So definitely find the average, but just for good measure and good business practice, feel free to bump it up just a little bit, A realistic number here today is probably 7.25. So won't you bump it up by 0.25% if you were to want a kind of like a rule of thumb to follow? Okay. Acquisition fee and the asset management fee, those two numbers there, you are probably not going to use those very much. Those are more or less for a syndication type deal where there are fees involved with the acquisition of it up front. Asset management fee is an annual fee that is charged by the syndication firm. So in your case, like 90% of the time, it's probably going to be double zeros there. So you can just put it 0, 0. If you ever do have to use it, just know why you're using it, and double check your numbers from there. Renovation budget. So when it comes to a property, the renovation budget, you may not know how much it's going to cost. I mean, me neither. Like, a lot of times I'll need a GC to verify and say, hey, how much will it cost to do A, B, and C to the property? But for the most part, most people should be able to estimate, oh, that might cost about this much, and give it a number, right? But of course, don't always rely on what you're guessing. You want to verify. So have some market knowledge when it comes to that. But to get some firm numbers, you're going to want a GC to come out, measure everything, take a look at it, understand all the layers and the depth of the property. That way they can give you a proper assessment as to how much it will cost to renovate. But in this case, for the sake of this project here and this analysis we're doing, the example, I'm going to say, hey, the property is in great condition. However, it needs a new roof. So let's go ahead and budget a new roof. A new roof, as of today, is running plus minus about $10 a foot. So right away, when I put in $10 a foot here, you'll see that the renovations budget is coming up to $250,000. Okay, the formula there was $10 a foot times the square footage, so you've got $250,000 for the budget. The leasing TI per square foot. Leasing TI per square foot is going to be very market dependent. There's some markets that give a lot of TI, some markets that don't. It's going to be building dependent too. If the building is in vanilla shell, you're not going to get very much TI as the tenant. If the building is in gray shell, you're going to get a lot of TI and money to use for build out. But it's going to really depend on the property, the condition, the market terms. So TI, let's go ahead and just assume that it's a vanilla shell building, and we'll just put $10 a foot as well. But keep in mind that $10 a foot, just now when I entered it, it didn't really change anything yet, because we just didn't get there yet. We're about to get to the section where it talks about leasing. Let's say number of vacant months. So when we're looking at this analysis, this property, we're going to assume that there's a small portion of the building vacant. Let's go ahead and say there's 10% of the building vacant, okay? That 10% of the building is 2,500 square feet. At 2,500 square feet, we have to guesstimate how long will it take to look for a tenant and how long will it take for the rent to commence. So it's not asking you how many months will it take for you to find a tenant. It's asking you how long will it take from the closing date for us to find a tenant that will start paying rent. So let's say you close on, hypothetically, January 1st of the year. It will take you 3 months to find a new tenant, which puts you at March 1st. And then from there, you give them 4 months of free rent, which puts you in, is that July? Puts you in July. And then that's when they pay rent. So you've got 7 months of vacancies there. And you got to make sure you fill it out correctly, where you've got 7 months of vacancy. And then on the 7th month, the tenant will start paying rent, and there's only 10% of the building vacant. So in this case, 2,500 square feet will be vacant for 7 months, and you have to budget out that proportionate share of the mortgage payment, and it's going to also budget out the proportionate share of operating expenses. If you want to look at the formula, come down here and click on it, and it will show you the vacancy period. It's a long one. So dig into that portion if you want. Moving on here, leasing commission. So initial lease terms, market average is about 5 years. Commission rate is 6%, but let's just hypothetically say it's 5%, just to say, hey, we got a little bit of a deal there. Other expenses, if there are other expenses here, let's just say you worked out a deal where, at closing you got to pay an extra fee somewhere, to whoever, you can fill it in here. Let's say there's an extra fee to XYZ company for ABC services, fill it in there. But I left the extra box in there for you to fill it out as needed. Now, once you fill that part out, we're going to go ahead and move to the right side over here. The gross base rent over here, the stabilized side is already done. It's already showing you what it will look like. Well, actually not done because there's no expenses, right? But it more or less shows you, it's already filled in most of it, what the income will look like so far. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I'm going to start filling out the current rent. So you have your base rate here of 500,000. You've got your CAM here of 187,000. The vacancy factor minus 5% is 34,375. So you've got your net, your total revenue here is 653. Okay, this is currently as is, and remember, this is totally a fake property. Now, when it comes to expenses, the first thing here is make sure you put in all expenses are negative. Okay, because expenses leave your pocket, so it's a negative. Real estate tax here. Real estate tax must be for the next year, not the current year. Use the county's tax appraiser tool to find an actual figure. If they give you a range, use the median amount. So this part is very important. When you are using property taxes, you want to do your best to don't use the current taxes. Always use the next year's taxes. Even if the owner is telling you that, hey, I'm paying current taxes of X, for good measure, use next year's taxes. That way you limit potential errors in your cash flow analysis. So if they're currently paying 30 grand a year right now for real estate taxes, still go to the tax estimator tool, see what it'll be next year when it sells for the potential price that you're about to pay. And whatever that number is, put it in there. So it might be 50 grand. Okay. So we'll put $50,000 in here. Insurance, let's say right now, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to use $1 a foot, so let's just call it negative 25,000. Utilities, let's just say, again, these are all guesstimations, right? 6,000. Management, let's say the management is going to be at 5% of this total number here, but it's going to be a negative, right? Oh yeah, there we go. And you got 32,000 there. Let me review this real quick. On the management, it's important to know that if the seller is currently paying property or manager and the cost fill it under current, if the seller does not have current management, still add a 5% fee of the gross base rent as management costs. Now, on column F, which is next to it, I put that the answer there is either 5% of the base rent or $12,000, whichever is greater, because it's multifamily. A multi-tenant building. If it's a single tenant building, the answer is $6,000. What I'm talking about is right here. The way management fees work, what I wrote in here, let me give you some color on it, is that they make normally 5% of whatever the total revenue of the building is. So total revenue means the base and the CAM. So 5% of that, if it's over $12,000 a year, then the 5% is what they go with. If it's under $12,000 per year, there's a minimum, right? They have to make certain income in order to be worth the time to manage the property. If it's under 5% or if it's under $12,000, then you have to use $12,000. So the cost for management when it's a multi-tenant building is either $12,000 per year or 5%, whichever is greater. The only time where it's less than $12,000 and you can use $6,000 is when it's a single tenant building, because there's only one tenant and there's nothing to really manage. All right. Make sure you keep that in mind. I know there's a lot that I wrote here, but if it doesn't make sense, just know that either $12,000 per year or 5%, whichever is greater, unless it's a single tenant building, at which point you can use $6,000 per year. Reserves here, if it's under a 5,000 square foot building, use $1 a foot. If it's over, use 50 cents a foot. So we're going to go ahead and use 0.50 times 25,000 square feet. So these are your reserves, okay? And it's got to be a negative. So I put that in there. For now, I'll put 0. So you've got expenses of $126,000 per year, which let's see what this comes out to. Okay, $126,000 a year divided by the square footage. So I estimate expenses at $5 a foot. A little light because I think expenses might be 10. But you know what? Let's go ahead and just use 5, okay? Because I don't want to complicate this whole example. So we've got expenses at 126. So now, let me see here. We've got the NOI of 526,000 per year. Okay, so in this example, after everything that we've filled out, we've got a building that's 25,000 square feet up for sale for $3 million. After taking out the expenses and whatnot, we've got an NOI of $526,000. Our net NOI per square foot, $21 a foot. Debt service, which is our mortgage that we're looking at, $126,000 per year. And net income after debt service, this is our cash on cash return. This is pretty solid. This is very good, which means that this is an excellent deal. This is one that one should be all over, right? But here, let me go ahead and I'm going to fill out this side. We'll get back to this, and then I'm going to adjust it from another angle. So let's go ahead and fill this out. I'm going to go, just for easy measure, I'm going to go ahead and just copy all this over here. And that way we've got the same information. So let me see here in the cam up here. I'm going to adjust it to make sure that it all looks good. Cam is $5 a foot. Oh, you know what? This should also be $5 a foot. Earlier I used $7.50, but again, I don't want to overcomplicate it. For the sake of this example, I'm going to use the same cam just so that I can explain this to you how the sheet works. So we've got, let me double check this, double check that. Okay, everything's right. On the stabilized side, all we're doing here is that we're increasing this income. And how do we get from current to stabilized from 500,000 to 750,000? That's a whole nother story. That's, right now everyone's at $20 a foot. That's my assumption. And the question that you should be asking me is, hey, how do you take it from $20 a foot to $30 a foot? That's a whole nother video, whole nother discussion. Let's just say that it happened. Okay. It happened and it took a year and everyone's at $30 a foot now. And the income to the building is higher, same expenses, but now you're bringing in almost $700,000 per year of NOI, same mortgage expenses, and the returns are phenomenal, 21 and 39%. I'm going to skip the principal reduction part for now, but I'm going to take a moment here to kind of switch gears. When this whole time, I'm setting this up for you. This is a hypothetical property, hypothetical situation, okay? Where we're going to shift gears at is that let's just say you're working with a seller and the seller didn't tell you $3 million. Okay. The seller just said, hey, here's all my information. Make me an offer. Let's just say that's what they did. And this is what they gave you. They say, hey, here's my income. Here are my expenses. Here's a rent roll, blah, blah, blah. And it's your job to figure out a purchase price. If I was to fill all this out and I threw in a $3 million purchase price there, the return of 21%, 39% is way too high, meaning that that's not the market average. Sure, everyone will love it, but that's not a reasonable return. That's way too high, which means $3 million, that price is way too low. So let's see what happens when we pump it up to $4 million. All right, now you're getting down to 13 on actual income, okay? On the current actual income, 13%, 13.59. It's still high, but that's still in the realm of possibility. If this person sold for $4 million, you've got yourself a deal. That's something that's really good. Let's see what happens when you change it to $5 million. At $5 million, you've got an 8% return. You still have a DCR of 1.52, which this DCR, you want to be at least 1.25. If you've got a 1.52 DCR and a net income after debt service return of 8% plus, again, that's still a lot of juice to squeeze. Like that's still a really good deal, almost too good to where it's like, I think we got to kind of figure this out. I think that's going to be an offer where if you tell the seller, hey seller, go ahead and sell for this price, he's going to laugh in your face because this is for today's current market with interest rate 7.5%, 8.17 is just too high. So going a little deeper, that's a cap rate of 9.41. Again, way too high. Okay, way too high. So let's go ahead and increase this more. $6 million. At $6 million, you've got a cap rate of 7.84. You've got a cash on cash return of 4.26 and a DCR of 1.26 with 30% down. That is in the realm of possibility. That's very realistic. That's the price point where a buyer could look at that and say, you know what, I'm okay with putting 30% down to own this property. And I'm okay with the 1.26 DCR. I'm okay with the 4.26%. And more importantly, the seller, he's probably going to be okay with a 7.84% cap rate. Now, that's going to be a higher cap rate, for the market as of today. I say higher, but not high. So it'll take a little bit of work to get the seller to get there. But again, you're in the game. You're not out of the realm of possibility. And this is something that is very, very sellable. So this is where you could take this to the seller and say, hey, seller, I've got someone who can buy for $6 million, or hey, I think you can sell for $6 million. How about we ask for $6.5 million from this buyer over here? It's one of those things where you kind of have to push numbers around to see where it falls. And the only reason why I know that this 4.26 works and this cap rate 7.84 will work for the seller, this 4.26 will work for the buyer, and the 7.84 will work for the seller, is because I talk to enough buyers and sellers every day to understand what people want. And I know where the boundaries are. It's just market knowledge. You got to have, 100 conversations to get there. But once you figure out where everyone's threshold is at, you're gonna know what people want, and then you'll make it happen. Now, keep in mind too, what we're talking about here is just current information. Okay, current income, current expenses. This here, the stabilized side, this is what you use to tell the buyer, hey, buy this deal now, but in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, whatever amount of time it will take, you'll get here. And guess what? Your return is not 4% anymore. It's 14%. That's what you want to be able to talk to them about in order to show them this is where we are today, but this is where we'll be tomorrow. Okay, well, not tomorrow, but you know what I mean. I'm going to move on now and show you the principal reduction side. And let's just say on this particular loan at this particular price, okay? I'm using my 10BII HP calculator on my phone here. At a loan amount of $4.2 million, we're going to use interest rate 7.5, 25-year AM. The amortization on this on year one is going to be $59,428, 468.18. So that's what you put in there. Now, this is the money that the mortgage is being paid. You're paying down almost $60,000 a year in principal, and this is in year one. This number increases as time progresses, assuming you don't refinance and your balloon doesn't come up. But you're paying off about $60,000 per year in principal reduction. And I added on here because when you add this additional $59,000 of principal reduction to the overall return, it bumps up the return from a 4.26 to 6.84. Now, here's the thing. Some people may look at it and be like, no, Tony, I'm not going to count the principal reduction. I only count it once I sell it, or if I refinance cash out, I count it towards the IRR. Everyone's going to be different. But it's okay to present this number because it's just a matter of perspective. If you present this number, some people may take it, some people will not. You'll see that I bumped up the return almost, was that 1.5? No, wait. No, it's like 2.5 points. So from a 4.25 to over 6.84. So yeah, you're talking over 2.5 points in terms of a return. And same thing over here on the stabilized side. You went from a 14.06 to a 16.64. The return looks a lot better. This part down here acts like a checklist. It's something where when these questions are asked, you're forced to answer them in such a way where it's going to make you think about the conversation you have with the seller. And if any of these questions don't make sense, it'll make you double check your numbers. So for example, are there expenses in column E estimated or actual? Column E, are these estimated or actual? If they're all actuals, like the seller actually gave them to you, write it down there. If they were all estimated numbers, you got to write down here as well as, these are all estimations. The seller did not provide numbers. That way, you know what you're working with. You know that you're working with fake numbers, and you got to ask the seller for an income statement, profit and loss statement when you're under due diligence in order to figure out what's the story behind his numbers. If estimated, was it by you or the seller? Again, that's just what we talked about. Are the leases triple net? Yes or no? Triple net is what we would love. But if they're not, we need to know that so that we can budget accordingly. When the lease is triple net, expenses matter, but they don't matter so much because they're being passed on to the tenant. Now, you don't want to be irresponsible and pass 100% of really bad expenses, really high expenses to the tenant. Like, for example, I got a insurance bid for a property for like $40,000 last week, but I shopped around. I found someone else today for like $10,000. I could have easily passed the $40,000 to the tenants. But guess what? Now they're going to be pissed off and they're going to leave, and you're going to be in a lot of trouble with a vacant property. But In this case, I shopped around. I did what I did to find a good deal for the tenants. And not only do they save money on the CAM, their total dollar cost per month is lower, which means when renewal time comes up, I can increase their rent and keep more of the base. So always do your best to manage expenses there. That's going to be a very important part of this. Is a seller collecting CAM? That's a question that you gotta double check and ask yourself, are they collecting? Because sometimes, going into this too, did the seller say they're collecting CAM, or are you assuming? Sometimes sellers will say, oh, I'm allowed to collect CAM, but I feel bad for the tenants. I like them. I know his parents, blah, blah, blah. I'm not collecting CAM, but the lease allows me to. You need to know that. Or sometimes you go, oh, no, there's no CAM. The leases are all gross. There's nothing in the lease that's going to allow me to collect CAM. You need to know that. So that you can, look at your cash flow appropriately. Is the purchase price from column B what they want, or what are they proposing? Going up to the purchase price. Remember earlier we were using $3 million and now it's $6 million. That $3 million was just something that was kind of whimsical. It's just something that I didn't really, it's a fake price. But then that was just to kind of get this example started. But as you dig into it, that fake price is almost like a real example. A lot of times you don't know. Sellers won't tell you what they want. They're kind of like, oh, just make me an offer. And if they say, just make me an offer, I didn't know what that property was in the beginning. I just put in $3 million, right? But then as you dig into it, wow, there's a $6 million property. Maybe if I, but let's say you're doing the math here, you get all the income and expenses and you're working it out. It's a $6 million property. But when you were talking to the seller, they were like, oh yeah, if I could get, if I could net $4 million or $5 million on this deal, I would sell it right away. It's a good deal, right? Because you're working it out. It's worth at least $6 million. But the seller just said, hey, I just want $5 million, and he's happy. And I've ran into that before. There's been cases before where the seller will say, oh, I want this price, but I know that it's worth a lot more. So then, we make moves to try to acquire and make it happen, right? So that is the bulk of how this two-column analysis works. I went and explained to you how to build it out, all the little comments in there, how they all matter. And I also went ahead and showed you, how to find a price that makes sense for the seller when you write him an offer, and to kind of have information to kind of guide you there. So take a look at this sheet again. If you don't have the sheet and you want it, shoot me an email. I'll send it to you. If you have additional questions, please do ask me. And I tried to be as thorough as I could, but I didn't want to overwhelm you any further. And if I did, I'm sorry. But any questions you may have, please let me know. And thanks for watching.